Do you get anxiety about hearing your own voice on your podcast? Do you struggle with the constant weight of consistency of getting episodes out on time every time? Do you procrastinate the creation of your show, but love the end result? This is Podcast Creators, where we get podcasting advice from real podcasters. On the show today, we have Vikki Louise, host of Hack Your Time, and she's going to answer all those questions and so much more. This is a really great interview. I think you're going to love it. I'm your host, Greg, creator of Indie Drop-In Network and co-host of Fan Dummies. This interview was recorded using Riverside FM, so if you like the way this looks and sounds, we'll put an affiliate link in the show notes below for you to check out. Everything we talk about on today's episodes will be down in the show notes, so in case you hear something that's interesting to you, you can easily click the link to find it. All right, let's get to it. Hi, Vikki. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. So happy to be here. How are you?
Oh, I'm really good. I'm super excited. I love doing these interviews in my morning because I feel like I have all my brain cells.
That's always a good idea when recording podcasts. Having
Yeah. I feel like I can be a little bit more witty, and after listening to your podcast, I think I need to be, right? Because you're always on, like, and I just find that so fascinating. So maybe we should start. Let's start with some easy things. Yeah. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your show?
Yeah, sure. I'm Vikki. I go by Vikki Louise. I am currently calling in from south of France, which is quite fun. And my podcast is called Hack Your Time. But we're going to speak about, I just rebranded like 2 weeks ago. So my podcast is about 2.5 years old. And I really started it because I used to have a lot of anxiety and panic attacks, and I didn't actually know what they were, which was kind of a benefit for a few weeks until I spoke to a friend who was like, this is clearly what they are. Because it meant for that first few weeks, I wasn't caught up in like the propaganda and everything of like, you have a disorder and there's something wrong with you and all of this stuff. It meant that I just got on with it, even when it was, shit. And so I didn't immediately make it mean that there was something wrong with me. And then as I looked into, and we can speak about this, as I looked into anxiety in our brain and how we evolved, I was like, this is not fun, but this is normal. Like, I'm not broken. And there was no one really speaking about that or to that. And I really wanted to help people be like, hey, you can have anxiety and still get shit done and still be valuable and all of those things. Like, it doesn't have to be something that makes us feel worse about ourselves. So that was why I started it.
Yeah, and it really resonates with me because I fight that exact battle. Every time you hit record on a podcast, there's that moment, right, before you hit record where you think, what am I doing? Like, who does this? Like, this is crazy. And then you have to kind of power through it. So you started in March of 2019, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it looks like you have 144 episodes.
Yeah, something like that. I did do one, I think, where like every week I did an episode. So that's why we have a bit extra. Yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. Where is the show at today? Like, I found you in the top charts of Apple, full disclosure. So
yeah. So where the show is at today, what, in terms of downloads and stuff or content?
Yeah, just anything you want to share about that.
Yeah. So the show has evolved. That's like a long relationship, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I feel like I've spent a long time with my audience, especially ones from the beginning, and the people that catch me now see like a much more like refined, even though I still totally don't edit and I'm completely myself.
Oh,
like,
we're talking about that.
Yeah,
We're
we'll
going to
talk
talk
about
about that.
that. I think what you'll find now with where my podcast is now is it's super clear and clean with like exactly what my purpose is in the world, and that purpose has kind of evolved. So it started with really wanting to help people with anxiety, but now it really is like how we use our time and how we don't get so part of that is how we don't get sidetracked by trying to solve our anxiety. And we really I just think we're never taught how to use our time. And yeah, so we're at 400,000 downloads now, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
When you release an episode, how many downloads does it get like right away when you like the very next day? Do you know that?
Well, I know just from this week. So the podcast comes out on Monday. There's probably, I think the first week is normally 1.6 thousand an episode. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's crazy. You're way up there in the upper echelon of what podcasters get, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. And I think it's like, and we spoke about this briefly before we recorded. Maybe I'm jumping things,
That's okay.
but when I first started and my numbers were nowhere near that, what I would do is I would visualize like speaking to an audience. So even when it was like 17 people, and it's so easy to be disheartened, like, oh, only 17 people. Like, what? We live in a world where you can produce content that can reach 17 people that you will never meet, that are on different continents, and like impact their lives. Like, that's amazing. So when I think about, 1,600, it's almost like I can't really comprehend it.
Yeah, so let's roll the film back to 2019 and kind of talk about that initial, because do you think you're remembering it differently, or in the moment when you looked at those downloads, did you have the perspective that you have now?
I definitely didn't have the perspective that I had now. So I'll even tell you, my first episode I recorded 3 times because I was being a bit perfectionist and like, I could do this better, or I could do. And I remember the third time, and I was like editing it. Maybe you guys can even tell, like I was trying to cut gaps, or like when I would say and my first episode took me so long. I remember the third time I was like, if I don't publish this as it is now, I'm going to create a habit that is going to cost me so much time that this is not going to be sustainable. And I think the reason why I've been so consistent with my podcast is because I get in and out in 30 minutes every week. That's what it maximum, unless I'm interviewing a client, which is longer. But it's like, I really don't create a fuss or a song and dance about it. But at that first point, probably like everyone at the beginning, I was like, this needs to be perfect. This needs to sound perfect. I went a bit screechy here, like just super hypercritical. So I remember that moment. I remember exactly where I was sat. And then I remember looking and seeing 17 downloads. And part of me was like, that's kind of cool. Like, who are these 17 people? And another part of me was like, how do you actually get more people to listen? Like, what?
Right.
Like I just had I was really like, it hit me like, oh, I'm doing this thing and I've got no idea how to reach people.
So did you make any sort of plan, or did you just decide I need a podcast and I'm just going to go for it? What was the steps?
To creating it was really like, so I'd had my experience with my anxiety. I'd certified as a coach, and then I got wrapped up in this startup. And I was like, I really want people to have this message while I don't have the capacity to take on clients.
Right.
So there wasn't much thought about it. I think I did write down like my first 5 episodes, knowing like what I wanted them to be on. And I even have 3 just on procrastinating, because I was like, this is like such a big thing that if someone only listens to the first 5 episodes, I want them to get such good value from it. And then it started to venture into like the unknown. And I even used to bring on interviews every 10th episode.
Sure.
And then I saw that not only was that more work for me with editing and longer, but the downloads weren't as much, and like people weren't downloading them as much because they were longer episodes. Mine are normally 10-15 minutes, so it attracts someone that wants 10-15 minute episodes. So I stopped doing that. So that's another thing for everyone to know, is like, be willing to test something and review it and change it. Like, nothing is set in stone, including even the name, which we'll speak about soon. But I think having that flexibility with myself to create what I wanted and be willing to test meant that I was always gonna like have more fun and do it, instead of, if you feel like I have to do it this way because this is how I've always done it, you are immediately taking away probably a big reason why you did it. Like, this is your opportunity to be creative.
I think there's this myth with podcasters that when they see creators in the top 100, which, you know, there's not many, they think, oh, she must be a celebrity. She's got a 1.5 million followers on Instagram. You know, she owns a Fortune, 500 company. There's some other motivation here that's bringing followers. But I don't, that's not the case for you, is it? Like, you built this from zero.
Yeah, that's really not the case for me. If anything, my podcast actually fueled my business in terms of like, it grew my email list, which is still at less than 2,000 people, and fueled my Instagram, which is only now at 3,500. So yeah, my podcast. And I'll even tell you what it was. What I think it was is what I really cared about when I created this podcast was creating something valuable. Like, I wasn't trying to create followers. I wasn't trying to create exposure. I was literally like, I want to leave 10 minutes, 15 minutes with like addressing something very real that I don't think is spoken about enough or spoken about in this way. And I want to always leave someone with something actionable to do, which I know you do too. And I think that format makes it so easy to consume, to share. And I always ask my audience as well to share it. I will be like, if this episode was helpful, share it with one person you love, which is such an easy ask versus like, if this episode is helpful, then go to my homepage and sign into this guide and then share it on your Twitter. And then it's like, how can you make it super simple, especially at the beginning?
Right. So when you created the podcast, did you have it in your mind that you were going to create something to fuel your coaching business at all? Like, was that any motivation, or was it truly that you just wanted to get the message out?
I think I thought at some point this is going to fuel my coaching business, but I wasn't working on my coaching business and didn't for a year or however long afterwards, because I was so wrapped up in the startup. Yeah. So it really was like, I was just so frustrated with like what I was finding out when I was looking at like our evolution and biology and what I was seeing in the mainstream, and even people coming up to me being like, just being in those conversations without people knowing my own experience and being like, the way it's spoken about in society, I was like, I just want to put something out there that's like offering a different perspective. So that was my main motivation. But then when I probably at some point knew I would come back to coaching as well and wasn't against that. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause one of the things that I like to do is I go back to the beginning. I listen to some of the original episodes, and you didn't really mention anything about coaching. And then, even in the new episodes, there's not any ads. It's like at the very end, you say, oh, hey, I have this coaching thing. You can check it out. Go to my website, join my newsletter, those types of things. Why don't you monetize the actual podcast instead of, in addition to the coaching business? Like, is there any strategy there?
Yeah, it really is just like, I just want it to be super simple and clean for my listeners. And I think, again, it's different for different people, but I do think now it is a funnel to my business. And so why would I make it more confusing with like 3 different funnels? Listen, I'm going to be honest. I don't know what I could get paid for ads. So I think I'm like blissfully unaware maybe, but I feel good with how it's serving the world and generating clients. And it just feels like this is what I want to do. To be honest, like I'm not tempted. I have been approached and I've never really given it a second.
Yeah, I think there's a big opportunity there for ads, but if it affects the coaching business, I'm sure that ROI is probably much more significant than like a one-time ad to sell a mattress or 2.
Yeah, and also it's like, what's my end goal really?
Right.
And it really is like to change people's lives. And I just want them to be thinking about that and them to be thinking about themselves while they're listening as well, instead of like, you know, some of the things that I speak about, like I will call people out on their bullshit on my podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah. And at that point, it can sometimes be like, oh, and then you get this invitation to leave the podcast and go do something else. It's like, actually, I'm just going to like go do that versus like stay on for that last 5 minutes and get the solution, because this feels like a bit uncomfortable right now. So I also think that is in line.
During the journey, were there any points where you saw like something happened in the world, or you got put on someone's list, or you got, you know, the New York Times, you know, mentioned you, or whatever? Did something happen to kind of propel you along the way at all?
I would love to be on the New York Times list. I don't, the truth is I don't even know all the media I've gotten, but I have made the effort to try and get onto media. And I'll tell you another big thing that I did that I think helped is I started doing podcast interviews. Like, it sounds so simple, but podcast listeners love listening to podcasts. Like, if you want your podcast to be listened to by more people, it might be great to be on like in a hard paper magazine, but maybe the people that read the hard paper magazine don't read the podcast. So I think it's such a simple thing to do as well, is like collaborate with other podcasters.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful, because if you can, you know, quote unquote, advertise to the people who consume the media, right, you have a much better chance to convert them. It's just the way it always works.
Yeah. And what's interesting now is I've realized I've been on like 150 podcasts speaking about my podcast under a different brand.
Yeah. Well, this can be your first one.
Yeah.
So that's a perfect segue. Okay. So, you know, full disclosure, when I was looking through the top 100 list and I saw your original title, what said, "Fuck anxiety, just get shit done." Is that what it was?
Yeah.
I thought, this podcast is for me. Honestly, yes. I saw the name and I went, "Oh man, that's so good." And but the podcaster in my mind said, you know, is this the right name for a big show?
Yeah.
Right. Like, you know, it's fun to choose this when you have 17 listeners, but you know, now you have hundreds and hundreds of thousands, and in 2 years it could be millions and millions.
Yeah.
Right. What was the motivation first to pick the name and then to change the name? I got to hear it all.
So to pick the name is actually a really fun one, because it was like 2 client quotes. And one of them was like, "You just help me get shit done." And the other one said something like "fuck anxiety." And I was like, oh, I'm going to put those together. That's like exactly how I feel. It's like, it just really summed up everything that I wanted to teach, which is like, fuck anxiety, fuck what you've been told about anxiety, fuck what you are making your anxiety mean around you. Like, I'm going to show you how to keep moving forward with anxiety. So it was really just like, and I loved that it was cheeky and it swore and it was like unclean and it wasn't trying to be super professional. And I come from like a corporate background where like I really, you know, was always on my best behavior. And I was like, I don't need to do that anymore. Like, screw that.
You have to proofread emails to make sure they're, you know, the tone is correct. You know, Okay. So fast forward 2.5 years, your podcast is working. I mean, I assume the people are coming in for coaching regularly. Everything's firing on all cylinders, and you say, you know what? Like, I'm gonna break this and see if I can improve it. Is that what happened? Like,
yeah. So actually, what happened was, so I used to coach really on anxiety and procrastination, and then last year, my coaching business, like it blew up in a really good way. And same with the podcast. We could say the same thing. Like everything that I was achieving, I was doing it in a much faster time than I thought. And I was like, things don't take time. Like, in my whole life, I thought I didn't leave my corporate job for years because I thought it was going to take time to replace that salary. I didn't, you know, go like lots of things that we do or don't do because we think like, oh, it's just going to take time. And I was like, I don't think things take time. And so I decided, it was the end of last year where I actually launched my first group mastermind program. And I was like, it's going to be about time and how we use time and how we like optimize our time. And I came up with the name Time Hackers. And really what happened then was like, I sat into like my purpose on this world. And I really feel like this is my calling. I know it sounds like a bit cheesy almost. But I really think everything we're taught about time is outdated, old, built from like long before podcasting, and so many careers and jobs existed, and it's ready for a shake up, and the 40-hour work week and 5 days, 2 days. And the idea, like all of these timelines that we've been told, it takes 6 months, even like takes 6 months to plan a wedding, or you should date someone for 2 years before you move in together. Like everywhere around us, we are being given timelines that are fucking made up. And the program is create a container for like how we actually stop focusing on the timeline and start focusing on what it takes to move results, and we get there much faster. So I did that. So it's been almost a year now, and I just realized my content was moving further and further away from anxiety and procrastination and really into the elements of time hacking, how I've defined them. And I was like, there's a disconnect now. And I was still getting a lot of emails from people like, your podcast has changed my life with my anxiety. And my clients still have anxiety, but there's a spectrum. And I think really now it's like the high overachiever anxiety. So it just felt like this was right for the whole business. So I wasn't just thinking about the podcast. It was really about committing to like, this is my purpose in the world. I think time hacking is like going to change people's lives, and it's what I'm here to do. So that's what drove the podcast rebrand.
Yeah, I mean, I see all sorts of conversations where people are saying, the tagline is the future of work. And I think that really plays into this strategy, right? Where even giant corporations are starting to figure out like, hey, maybe 8 to 5 isn't really the best productivity schedule.
Yeah.
And if we hand down tasks and just say, here's the deadline for the tasks, go forth and, sell things, make money, build things, whatever your job is.
Yeah.
It seems, at least on the surface, to be much more effective.
Yeah, like we have to remember that like but what we've done with time, I think, is similar to what they've done to the diet industry, with like mass market it, mess it up, and then sell solutions that are like very constraining and limiting. Whereas like what time hacking is like getting rid of all those rules and like opening it up. Like I had a client on the podcast today actually, and she was saying to her it's like bending time versus like I have to do this within 3 hours, or even like the rules like eat the frog, do the hardest thing in the day. Like maybe you don't want to do that every day. Maybe not every day. Like even for women, we have a cycle. Maybe men do too, I don't know. But we have a cycle, and where we are in that cycle literally impacts our productivity. Like that's never been thought of. Like, your energy on a Monday morning when you have just spent the weekend like with friends or whatever, like might be very different to your energy on a Thursday afternoon when you've been dealing with like your neighbor's dog, barking all night. Who knows? So like we're trying to like shove our circle selves into square shaped holes, and like actually our productivity as a society hasn't increased since the 1970s. So given all the advances in technology, it tells us something isn't working.
That resonates with me so much because I had a friend a long time ago who I thought was super, super productive. In my brain, from the outside, it seemed like everything was put together. Like, he always overachieved. And I asked what his secret was, and he said he takes a nap in the middle of the day.
Yes, I love napping in the middle of the day.
And I was like, really? He goes, yeah, because what I found is that after lunch, I'm just not productive. So I just found a way where if I take an hour to myself and then I come back, then I can put together 2 or 3 super productive hours and I don't feel bad about it.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I mean, that's really simple.
Yeah, that's way too simple. But I don't need to download 7 apps for that.
Yeah, like there's no like, I mean, is there like a supplement I can take for this?
Yes.
But let's, as we transition to like some really appointed device, or as we transition to some advice directly for indie creators, maybe we can start with kind of a lesson I learned by looking at your YouTube, which you have a few videos up there, which I thought were absolutely hilarious. And in one of them, you said that you spent $10,000 on some Facebook ads that did absolutely zero.
Yeah.
Have you done experiments like that with your podcast at all? And has anything worked or not worked or?
So the Facebook ads, yeah, they were for my coaching business. And again, it was
Mhm.
around, so actually, I'll tell you why it was worth the $10,000, because they are the people that told me to start a podcast.
Oh, wow.
So that was like a good lesson afterwards to be
Mhm.
like, I'm not going to hold a grudge about that, because actually it was totally worth it if I look overall. But really, again, what was happening there was I was getting busier and had this startup opportunity, and I was like, I don't have time to like produce all this stuff. Let's use
Yeah.
Facebook ads and let's use an expert to do it for me. But really what I was doing was outsourcing responsibility when I hadn't even learned how to sell the packages. So
Right.
I just recently started with a Facebook ads person again now for my coaching business. And it's like a completely different ball game, because I'm like, okay, this is how it should be working. This is like, it's just my knowledge and experience is higher. So I think that's
Yeah.
really important for everyone listening to think about, is like, it's easy to throw money at something and someone tell you they're an expert. And like, I mean, I don't even know why I carried on. I worked with them for 5 months. After 3 months, it should have been like, no results, bye. But one of the things I speak about on the podcast is taking radical self-responsibility. And sometimes I do that too much. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, it's my fault the ads aren't working. It's like, no, someone's selling you something. Maybe it's their fault.
Yeah, I think that that's a good lesson, because I had a similar experience, which is why it resonated. When I first started podcasting, years ago, I thought my podcast is amazing. Like, all I need to do is, like, there's already a flame. I just
Yeah.
need to, turn up the heat. And the
Yeah.
way I can do that is to spend tens of thousands of dollars on advertising.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't work.
Yeah.
And what I think was a hard lesson for me, and a very expensive lesson, advertising works when the product is already good.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't make a poor product sell. It
Yeah.
just throws money away.
Yeah.
And if you don't know how to communicate the value, you don't know like why, who your market is, it's really a frustrating task.
Yes. So I guess from there, for me, I didn't then put ads into the podcast because of that bad experience, but I did get the podcast from it. And again, I think it's
Yeah.
like, I'm sure neither of us can sit here and promise someone that like, you are not going to, slip up and get a few grazes along the way. You absolutely will. And at the time, it was honestly devastating, because we were in this startup, me and my partner, making very little money. It was like all of my savings. I was really banking on like I really saw it as an investment that was going to return, and it was
Right.
really, really shit. And I think it's important to say that, because if anyone falls down and gets that graze and feels terrible about it, it's like, that's also not the end point.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. Okay, so let's move into just a couple of very direct questions, and then we'll get some free coaching from you
Do it.
for the podcasters. One of the issues I see mentioned a lot in forums is that creators they have anxiety around the sound of their voice.
Yeah.
How would you suggest somebody gets around that issue?
Yeah. So one of the things I speak to and teach a lot is kind of like, so you have this anxiety about your voice. And whenever we have anxiety, our brain tells us that we need to solve that anxiety and we need to fix it. When the reality is, you can have anxiety around your voice and you are still physically capable of recording a podcast and publishing it. And sometimes we're like so busy pandering to our anxiety that we just don't do the thing. And
Yeah.
what I want to encourage everyone is like, you can have anxiety around your voice and you can still record the podcast and you can still publish it. And the more you do that, like eventually what's going to happen is your brain's going to get bored of criticizing your voice. And it's going to be like, well, I guess this isn't going to stop her, because really what's happening is, and the reason we have anxiety is your brain's like, you are about to expose yourself to the world. Why would we do that? That's like other people's opinions. That's potential rejection and negativity and failure. And the anxiety is there to stop you doing that. But eventually, once your brain learns that you're not going to die by publishing an episode, it's like, oh, okay. So even like me and you I spoke to you about my first episode, re-recording it 3 times. It was the same thing. My brain was like, it has to be perfect so that no one ever criticizes us ever versus like, of course people are going to criticize.
Yeah.
Like, it's a reflection.
Welcome to the internet.
Welcome to the internet and welcome to humans. Like, even before the internet, right? Like literally our brains are designed to judge. So I would just say, be mindful of trying to eliminate the anxiety before you do the thing. Because I had a client and she was like, she came to me really proud. She's like, and so I was experiencing anxiety. So I stopped what I was doing. I swept the floors for like 2 hours, but then I didn't feel any better. And I was like, yeah, because the anxiety isn't going to go away by not doing the thing. The only way to manage it is to do the thing and teach your brain that you're not going to die.
Yeah, that's really amazing advice. So I structured the questions because I wanted to throw one anxiety question at you just for like old time's sake.
Yeah.
But the next ones are totally time management. So
it's they still connect. Like,
yeah.
I still see them all connecting. And also I say not time management, right? I'm like anti-time management.
Oh.
Let's see the questions.
No, good. So that's a good distinction.
Time hacking.
Time hacking.
Yes.
So one of the problems with podcasting is this message that consistency is king.
Yes.
Right. It is a relentless burden that people, like, the best practices say, hey, Joe Smith or Susie, he relies on your podcast every single Thursday or Monday or Tuesday or whatever for their commute to work. And if you don't give it to them, they will find something else. So how do you combat that? Because it's almost impossible to have a episode every single week without fail. Like, you have to take some time off, I think, don't you?
Well, so there's two ways I'm going to approach it. One is you can batch record and have them, like, sometimes I will record for a few weeks, or when I'm interviewing clients, it will be like done for a few weeks. So you can definitely do that. But I think what's more interesting, so I just wanted to put that out there, that you can do that. And what's really interesting is, like, what the fuck does it mean to be consistent? Like, really, like, consistent is not a measure. Someone says it's consistent to post at the same time every week, at the same intervals, for the same length of program. Like, what are the fucking rules? Like, no, there are none. Like, seriously. Consistency is a mindset, right? Like, when you are consistent with your friends, is it because you call them the same time every week? No. Like, that's actually not what creates consistency. It's more about, like, I think how you, I think the number one thing you want to be consistent about is the value, right? That you are giving. But time frames or length or frequency or any of that stuff, like, it is not going to determine your relationship with your listeners, just like it doesn't determine your relationship with your friends. And anyone that is out there preaching consistency, are they making it measurable? Do they have, like, specific timelines? Because I bet if you asked 5 of them, they would all say different things. A 15-minute, like, when I started, people were like, that's short for an episode. Like, most episodes do really well at 40 minutes plus. And I was like, great, I'm still going to do this. Like, it doesn't matter. I have a peer, like a colleague, and she does them, like, as and when she feels like, and we actually have a podcast together that is never consistent because we're 2 people, 2 different time frames. She's in South Korea. I'm in France. Like, she's just had a baby, and we, like, people love it. It's just like, it gives people permission to also not be consistent. So if you are also gonna be human and not have it regular all the time, you can even speak to that and be like, hey, this podcast is created by a human for humans. There is no perfectionism here. We are probably not going to get it out the same exact time every week. Be sure to hit subscribe so you get notified of when it comes out. It's going to be the best surprise for you in the morning. Like, really addressing it instead of, sometimes we can, like, hide behind, like, oh no, like, I didn't do an episode last week, I'm just going to not say anything. Like, remember, your audience are your friends. They want a relationship. And I don't know if you found this episode of mine, but I have one called Sitting in Consequence. And I used to do the podcast same time every week, very consistent. And then I traveled for work, and I said I would do it in the hotel. I didn't do it in the hotel. I literally got to the airport and was like, should I just do it in the airport? Like, I don't know. And obviously I couldn't. So instead, I wrote this concept around sitting in consequence, which is something I teach my clients now as well, which was really like owning up to my audience and being like, here's what happened. And I didn't let myself just record a shitty episode just to get it in for the deadline. I actually, like, it's public. all of you know that I failed. I speak about procrastinating and here I am failing. Like, and it's like one of the most downloaded episodes. Like, people love it. So people will love you for being human.
Yeah. I really like that. What I didn't listen to that episode, but I plan to. The one that spurred this question is I listened to the consistency episode where you said, consistency's fake. It's a mindset. Yeah. Like you just have to, and I was hoping that you would kind of go into that, which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah.
And you eased me into the last question.
Yeah.
Right. Procrastination.
Yes.
I know this is a theme.
Yes.
Right, that I find in your podcast, which I think is really fun because I struggle with this myself.
Yeah.
But so many times on Twitter, I see podcasters post, I have to record my episode. It comes out tomorrow, but I haven't even started on the show notes. Like I have so much research to do. Why do you think people get in that situation and how can you get out of it?
Yeah. So I say that there's 4 reasons why we procrastinate. The first is our thoughts about time. Mm-hmm. But really underneath that are the other 3. And the one is our thoughts about ourselves. When we self-identify as a procrastinator, it's like we are a vending machine and we are putting in procrastinate and then we're wondering why we get that out. It's like literally that's how our brain operates. Whatever you say is what it creates. Yeah. So that's one of the most common ones that I see that like we're not even aware of. Like you literally never have to describe yourself as a procrastinator. So that's the first. The second one is our thoughts about like the task at hand. So if, for example, you've got like a podcast episode where you're like, I can't wait to teach this. It's going to be fucking amazing. Like it's so easy. I already know everything. You're probably going to show up differently than when you're like, I don't know if people are going to like this and this part's boring and I don't like writing the show notes or the research starting is the hardest part or whatever it is. Just notice the story you have around the task at hand because that 100% is going to drive your action of like putting something off. We're going to put something off if we don't want to do it. And the other one that we'll speak to is our thoughts about the stakeholders. So if you like, even you've probably heard me speak today, like I think of my listeners as my friends, as my community. Even like Greg, you said when we got on today that you felt that and you felt like we were friends. Like that's because that's genuinely how I feel. Mm-hmm. But if you think like someone's going to hate this, people don't even like it, no one cares, no one's listening, you are not going to be motivated to show up and do it. So it's really our thoughts about ourselves, our thoughts about the task, and our thoughts about the stakeholders. And then sometimes our thoughts about time, right? Like not having enough. And the reason why it's so important to pause and identify that is like our thoughts are not facts and they are changeable. We can redirect our brain to fuel us. Like, for example, like if your brain's like, I'm a procrastinator, you're like, how do I know I'm going to get this done? You've probably got like, well, I've done 50 fucking episodes before. Like, this is nothing new. If you're telling yourself like, I don't want to do this because I don't like this part of the task, why do you want to do it though? Because you are choosing to do it. Everyone with a podcast is choosing to have a podcast for a reason. Make your brain go away from its default negativity and like actually dig for like, why is it? And your brain might resist this at first because our brains are wired to be lazy, like conserve energy. But you get to like ask it like, okay, but why did I start this podcast? And you can even, if you do get messages from people saying about how it's helped them or impacted their lives, like you could set in a routine right before I start my podcast, I read one of those appreciation messages, something like that.
Do you think it's okay to like the end result, but hate the steps to get there? Like, is that a normal thing?
I think it's totally okay. But I think what I would say is like, recognize that's a choice. So do you want to continue to hate the steps to get there? Is that worth it for you? Listen, sometimes the answer is going to be yes. Like I've not convinced myself that I love the process of filing taxes and all of that stuff. I'm like, I'm okay. Like it's not something that I do every week. So if you are producing a podcast every week and you are telling yourself that you hate the process, like it might be worthwhile starting to sell yourself and redirect your thoughts onto what you do like about the process. And maybe you won't love all of it, but maybe like even a 50% shift or even a 10% shift is going to change the game for you and could be that difference between like getting it done or not. And in fact, I'm going to stick with that 10% shift because it could literally be one different thought. Your thought could be research is the hardest part. You'd be like, but why have I chosen this topic? It's because it interests me. And that could be the spark that gets you going. So it doesn't have to be like, okay, I love research always and I'm an amazing researcher. Like, it doesn't have to be dramatic.
Well, I think that is a brilliant place to stop. I don't know how it gets better than that, honestly. So I appreciate you being on the show so much. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and any of your calls to action?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. So first place to go is Hack Your Time, the podcast with Vikki Louise on any podcast app. Second place to hang out with me is on Instagram, just at Vikki Louise ___ because there's other Vikki Louises in the world that spell their name with Vikki like me. And then you can also I have a freebie called How to Stop Wasting Time. And you can get that at vikkilouise.com/guide. And it's like a 10-minute video with the 4 biggest time wasters and how to solve them. So probably perfect for some of the things we've spoken about today.
That's brilliant. And a personal endorsement for me, if anybody's watching, I think if you have 15 free minutes in a week, this is a great way to spend it. I know that I resonated with many of the episodes already, and I plan to continue listening.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much to Vikki Louise, host of Hack Your Time, for an amazing episode. I mean, I got so many pointers, and it hit on things for me personally that I'm going to use right away. So I hope this interview had the same effect for you. If you liked this show, please hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up, and hit the bell so you don't miss anything. As always, we talk to lots of other podcast creators and get great advice from all sorts of different people. So if you'd like that, you can click one of these boxes above. All right. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.